All right, good morning, everyone. Welcome to our bidders conference for the 2019 Youth Reinvestment Grant. We are live streaming the event today. So we've got some IT staff here and we've got the microphones going. So when we get to the part at the end where we do questions and answers, we will ask you to come up to one of these two front tables and use the microphone so that we can get that on the recording as well. So another thing that I want to point out in regards to the folks joining us on live stream, we will be taking questions from them as well. So we'll stop at a couple points and ask for questions both in the room and on the live stream, and we'll respond to all of those in turn. And so with that, we'll take a look at what our plan is for today, and starting out with introductions. I am Kimberly Bouchard. I'm the lead field representative here at the BSCC for the Youth Reinvestment Grant, and I'm going to ask my colleagues to introduce themselves as well.
Hello, I'm Elise Ram. I work in the research department here at the BSCC, and I helped working on the grant by helping them develop the rating criteria and the rating factors that you'll use when you do your actual proposal.
Hi, I'm Isabel Diaz. I'm the analyst on the Youth Reinvestment Grant and also the Tribal Youth Diversion Grant.
Good morning. My name is Juanita Renaga. I'm the Senior Management Auditor for the BSCC, and I'm here to support the team.
I'm Greg Donkerbrook. I'm a manager here at the BSCC. I supervise Isabel, and I provide support to the grant program.
All right, so I have already asked that we invite our online participants to identify themselves. And so I know we've got a number of people online, and I would ask again, if you haven't already done so, please take a minute to send us a note and just introduce yourselves so that we have a record of who's joined us here today. And also for the online participants, I would ask that you take a minute to let us know if the sound is good, if the visual is good. We would appreciate any responses to that up front so that we can address any issues that you may be having. And then in terms of those of you who are in the room, it's not a huge number of people, so I think what I'm going to do is ask for each of you to just quickly introduce yourselves and let us know your organization. So I'm going to grab this. Actually, it looks like I've got somebody ahead of me. We'll use the mic here and just pass that around. If we can quickly do some introductions in the room. Thank you, Sean.
Hi, I'm Lavina De Silva, Operations Manager for Beyond Emancipation.
Great.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Nella Gonsalves. I'm Deputy Director for Beyond Emancipation out of Oakland, California.
Good morning. I'm Lisa Wilson. I'm Director of Research and Evaluation for Flint Ridge Center.
Good morning. I'm Sean Latour with the Sheriff's Community Impact Program, and we're part of the Youth and Family Collective.
Sergey Shkirkin here for Pro Youth and Families and Youth and Family Collective, and Carol Rossett, also from Pro Youth and Families and Youth Family Collective.
Hi, I'm Richard Martin, Grants Manager for 5Q Schools and Programs.
I'm Brendan Messina. I'm the Youth Advocate Coordinator for Yuba County Office of Education.
Hi, I'm Daphne Watson, Executive Director of Mental Health America in San Diego County.
Hi, good morning. My name is Michael Mandefro. I'm the Director of Finance for Mental Health America of San Diego County.
Good morning. Cesar Castaneda, Mental Health Administrator at La Familia Counseling.
Kristen Curry, Program Coordinator with Sacramento County Behavioral Health Services.
Maria Pagador, Program Planner, Sacramento County Behavioral Health Services.
Good morning. Diane Ortiz, Youth Alliance, serving Central Coast and South Santa Clara County.
Good morning. My name is Karen Green. I serve as the treasurer for the California Association of Youth Courts.
Okay. Great. Thank you so much for taking time to do that. Okay, very good. Thank you for that feedback. Okay, so again, welcome to all of you. I appreciate you being here, either online or in person, and taking time to learn more about this Youth Reinvestment Grant. So looking at this first slide here, what we're going to do over the next hour or two is I'll provide a pretty high-level summary of the grant, and then we'll talk a little bit about the executive steering committee that was responsible for developing the grant and the RFP. We'll take a close look at the provisions in the RFP as well as walking through the project budget and what's required for that component. We're going to look at the proposal rating process and look at the proposal instructions. Then we'll review a few of the key dates that are ahead of us for this grant, and then the final component will be a question and answer period. Okay, so looking at this grant, it began last year with inclusion of $35 million in the 2018 Budget Act. So when we went through this process last year, we had 30 cities and counties that were successful in the application process and were selected to receive funding. So we have awarded out 28 of the available 35 million, but that does leave us with 7 million remaining, and that 7 million is being combined for this 2019 Youth Reinvestment Grant to bring us to a total of 12 million in funding for this year. So we had the 7 million from last year. We got a new 5 million in the 2019 Budget Act. So the total is 12 million. When we take out our available administrative funds, we have 11.8 million that's available to be awarded as grants through this process. The eligible applicants for the 2019 YRG are different than last year. So what we're looking at for this year is we have 2 possible eligible applicants. We have nonprofit organizations, and we also have local government entities that are eligible to apply. And then the purpose of the funding has remained essentially unchanged from last year to this year. And I don't know why I said essentially. It is unchanged. The purpose is to provide diversion programs for minors. Those diversion programs are intended to be trauma-informed, evidence-based, culturally relevant, and developmentally appropriate. And the intent is to provide these diversion services in communities that are underserved and that are experiencing high arrest rates. The executive steering committee that was pulled together to help us develop the RFP and that will be responsible for reading and rating the proposals was chaired by one of our BSCC board members. In this case, the chair was David Steinhardt out of Marin County. And David was joined by 15 other members representing various disciplines and communities throughout California. And the full roster for that RFP is included in, the full roster for the ESC is included in the RFP, and that can be found either on page 9 or 35. So as I mentioned a minute ago, the RFP serves 2 important roles. The first piece is to help us do the work of developing the grant. So they establish the criteria, along with the criteria that's provided in statute, for what will shape the RFP. And then the second phase of their work has to do with reading and rating the proposals that are received in response to the RFP. So because of the nature of the work that they do, both in developing the criteria for who's eligible to apply for these funds and what that process will look like, as well as their work on the back end in terms of reading the proposals, rating the proposals, and ultimately developing a funding recommendation, we do have conflict of interest policies that prohibit anyone who participated in the ESC from receiving these grant funds. So that includes receipt for the individuals themselves. It also includes a receipt of funding by the individual's organization that they work for. And it also includes both a direct receipt of funds or an indirect receipt of funds. So if there's an organization that's involved in the ESC in some way, they couldn't receive the funds directly as an applicant, nor could they receive the funds indirectly as a subcontractor or subgrantee of a direct applicant. Okay. So just looking now specifically at the information that's included in the RFP, this next set of slides will reference the RFP by page number at the bottom of the slide. So if you have that in front of you and are interested in following along, hopefully that'll make it easier for you to do so. So we're starting on page 1, just looking at, in general, what these funds are intended to support. So again, we're looking at funding diversion projects, and specifically diversion projects that are trauma-informed, evidence-based, culturally relevant, and developmentally appropriate. And as I mentioned a minute ago, the idea here is that we will fund projects that are located in communities that lack services currently and that are experiencing high juvenile arrest rates. Besides today's event, the next important date that's coming up for this grant is that we have asked for letters of intent to apply to be submitted to our office by December 20th. So I know that's right around the corner and it's a busy time of year, but it's a huge benefit, a huge positive for us to be able to receive these letters of intent so that we can plan for what's coming up with this grant and the number of applications that we might be expecting. So a couple of things that I want to note about the letters of intent. First, they are non-binding. So we're asking for you to let us know if you think you're going to apply, but I do want to make note that if you submit a letter of intent to us and down the road it's not coming together, or for whatever reason you realize that you're not going to be able to apply, you would be in no way penalized for that. And then on the flip side, if you are an eligible applicant, but at the time that we've asked for letters of intent, you didn't submit one, of course you are still eligible to apply up to the due date for the proposals. Just to expand on that second point a little bit though, I want to say that again, because it is so beneficial for us to receive these letters of intent, even if you can't let us know by December 20th, I would still really urge you to let us know at whatever point you do make that decision so that we can take that into account as we plan for the next stages of this grant. Okay, so then the proposal due date. February 14th of 2020 is the date when these proposals will be due. And we are only accepting electronic submissions for this grant. So by February 14th of next year, what we would need to receive is one complete proposal package for each applicant. And we are asking that those be submitted directly to the grant mailbox, which is Youth Reinvestment Grant at bscc.ca.gov. And I just want to make a quick note on that. So you'll see in the RFP the same language that I just used, that complete proposal package. So what that's going to look like is two components. We're going to have a budget document that's in Excel. It's very important that that be in Excel when it's submitted to us. And then the other component of your complete proposal package is going to be a PDF document of all the remaining pieces of your proposal. So we're going to look at that a little bit more closely, but just to give you a general idea, there's a checklist that's provided at the back, and there's a lot of different pieces that are required for a complete application. And so what we'd like you to do with those different components is make sure that all the pieces that are signed get their signatures, everything's filled out completely, but then just take all those parts of the proposal package and scan them so that you can submit to us one PDF that has all of that in addition to the one Excel document that has your budget. Okay, so then moving on to RFP pages 3 and 4, we're looking at the primary goal for this funding as being able to avoid initial contact with law enforcement. So we're really looking at trying to divert youth from the earliest stages here. But we do recognize a secondary goal that is avoiding further involvement in the juvenile justice system. And then in augmentation of the diversion interventions that you'll be proposing here, we want to make a note that it is required by the statute that you include at least one of the following components. So educational services, including academic or vocational services, mentoring services, mental health services, or behavioral health. So again, I highlighted the "or" there because you're only required to use one of those as part of your diversion intervention. All right, so the diversion services that will be funded through this grant are intended to target youth who are under 18 or who are 18 and over, but with continuing juvenile court jurisdiction. Your applications are required to demonstrate a clear referral plan and process, and you must show that you have a mechanism to ensure participant confidentiality when your project is implemented. Applicants are also asked to show a commitment to avoid net widening. And then finally, the RFP is designed to invite broad flexibility. So with your applications, you're going to be given the flexibility within your proposal narrative to consider allowing many different diversion options. So we recognize that there are different ways to accomplish diversion, and you'll be given the opportunity in your narrative to lay out the right one for your particular situation. And also, there's flexibility there to incorporate various entry points. So as we look at the juvenile justice continuum, there are any number of points at which diversion could occur, and those are all options within this process. Okay, so just looking a little bit more closely at the eligible applicants. For the nonprofit organizations, it is required that they be tax exempt according to the Internal Revenue Code section 501c3 or c4. And they're going to need to meet all of the BSCC's required criteria for non-governmental organizations. And we're going to review those in detail in just a few minutes here. Then the other eligible applicants are local governmental entities. And that can be any local government entity. So there's obviously a lot of different organizations that could come under that umbrella, but I do want to note here that it is required for our local government applicants that 90% of the award amount be passed through to a community-based organization to actually deliver the diversion services. For this 2000, yeah.
We had a request from online to go into more detail about net widening.
So the idea with net widening, thank you, Greg, basically is that we want to divert youth from the juvenile justice system, but we want to make sure that we're always serving young people at the lowest possible level. So you may have say a court diversion program, and that's great, but if there's a way to keep kids out of the system at an even earlier point than that, we want to make sure that that court diversion process isn't bringing in anyone that could actually be diverted even sooner in the process than that. So that's the idea with net widening. Okay, so then looking back to eligible applicants, and we're on page 4 of the RFP. We just talked about the 2 possible applicant types, and then we also want to note that for this round of funding, the 2019 YRG, no applicant will be allowed to apply more than one time. And then also, I want to note here that for those individuals that are recipients of 2018 YRG funding, they are ineligible to apply for this 2019 funding. Okay, so to expand on that a little bit, we have direct recipients for our 2018 funding that were cities and counties. That cycle also included local public agencies. It also included a lot of community-based organizations as service providers. So for anyone who's a recipient, either directly or indirectly, of the 2018 YRG funds, you're ineligible to apply for this new round of funding. That is, I think, perhaps kind of a big deal. So maybe I'll pause right there and just check to see if there are any questions at this point on what we've covered. Yeah, come on up to the microphone if you would. That's okay.
Again, my name is Karen Green, representing the California Association of Youth Courts.
Okay.
I wondered if you could give us a little better definition and maybe even some examples of exactly what you mean by culturally relevant and trauma-informed and developmentally appropriate. Those are pretty broad terms and could mean different things depending on the organization. So I think it would be really helpful if you could give us some examples of what you're looking for.
I think they're each defined in our glossary, but if they aren't, we can include those for our RFPs. So I'm not going to respond to that here today, but we will respond to it and make that available on our website.
Good, thank you very much.
You're welcome. Anything from online?
Yeah, we've got 2. The first one is, do applicants still have to partner with city, state, or local agencies to be able to submit? That's the first one.
Okay, so our non-governmental, our nonprofit organizations who will be applying for these funds do not have any particular partner requirement. However, our local government agencies that can apply for these funds do have to have a partnership with at least one CBO or non-governmental organization or nonprofit organization. We use those terms, all 3, in order to be the service provider for this grant.
The next question is, can an NGO or CBO be the lead and have a local government as someone that they partner or contract with?
Yes. So I think the idea there is that the CBO would apply directly, and that's fine as long as it is a nonprofit. And yeah, you can lay out whatever proposal works for your unique situation, and that could certainly include partnering with a government agency. Okay. Okay. Yeah, let's go ahead and have you come up to the front.
Hi, my name is Maria Pagador from Sacramento County.
Hi.
And we have several separate departments in Sacramento. One of them is the Department of Probation, who received the 2018 YRG grant. Does that prevent the Department of Health Services to apply for this 2019 YRG grant?
Definitely not.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Come on up.
Hi, Diane with Youth Alliance. If a nonprofit were to be the lead applicant and partnered with a education district or something, is there a limitation on the amount of funding that government entity could receive as a subcontractor?
There is not. Okay, thank you for those questions. We'll go ahead and turn back to the PowerPoint now. And it looks like we are on page 5 of the RFP. And so here's our specific criteria for NGOs. As a result of the work that we do often have non-governmental organizations who are our grantees or who end up being the sub-grantees for the grantees we're working with. So we do have some pretty specific criteria that we apply in those cases. And the first is that the NGO be duly organized, in existence, and in good standing for at least 6 months. So in this case, the way this is structured, if the NGO is going to be the applicant and receive funding directly from us, then they would need to have been in existence and in good standing for 6 months prior to the date that they enter into contract with us. For a government agency that would be having an NGO as a sub-grantee, that 6 months would be from the date that they have the fiscal agreement with the applicant. Okay, they won't have a direct contractual agreement with us, so we would look at the date of your contractual agreement with them. Okay, then also NGOs need to be registered with the California Secretary of State's office, if applicable. They need to have a valid business license, if required by their jurisdiction, as well as any other licenses or certifications necessary to provide the type of services that they're looking to provide. And finally, they need to have a physical address. Moving on to the project funding information. The projects that are selected for funding under this 2019 YRG will have a grant term of 3 years. We're anticipating that to begin on July 1st of next year and then run through June 30th of 2023. Again, we do have a total of $11.8 million that's available to fund new grants. And the minimum request amount for any one grant is $50,000, and the maximum request amount is $2 million. The funding is broken into 3 categories as designated by the Executive Steering Committee. And those 3 categories are based on the amount being requested. So small requests are defined in this case as being those requests that are up to $600,000, and that is $600,000 for the entire 3 years. And the amount of funding set aside for the small requests is $2.5 million. Medium requests are those requests that are more than $600,000 and up to $1.2 million. Again, that's for the entire 3 years. And we have 4 million that's set aside for medium requests. And then the large requests are defined as anything that's over 1.2 million, of course capped at, or I'm sorry, large requests are more than 1.2 million and up to the $2 million cap overall. And we have 4 million that's set aside for that category. And I do want to take a minute here to just provide a little bit of additional hot off the press information. We did have one grantee from the first funding round that has had to withdraw. So we had just about $1 million that was reverted from round one that, assuming we get our BSCC board to approve this, will be rolled into round two and allocated as part of this process. So when we look at this table on the slide here, the 11.8 million that I've been talking about so far this morning is based on the inclusion of that additional grant funding. You see at the bottom here, this only totals to 10.5 million. So what will happen to these categories if our board approves the inclusion of that reverted grant into this round is that for smalls, would be looking at 2.8 million. And then for medium and large, that will bump up to 4.5 million each for those two categories. Okay, thanks. Okay, so then just finishing up with this project funding information, we are not allowing multiple applications in this round, and that's based largely on the fact that we have much less funding overall this time. So last year we had a total of 35 million. This year we're looking at 11.8. So the ESC felt it was important to limit that. Again, as a reminder, 2018 recipients are not eligible this time. For those applicants who are participating this time, the match requirement is just like the first round. So there's generally a 25% match that's required for applicants. However, the statute provides for an exception in those cases where you're applying from a jurisdiction that experiences little or no existing diversion infrastructure combined with a high need. So in those cases, there is a place on our applicant information form where an applicant can identify as being eligible for the lower 10% match. If you're planning to use that option, we do want to remind you to make sure that you check that box on the applicant information form. And then a final note here that supplanting of funds is not allowed under this grant. Okay, and I know we've got at least one question, I think, in the room and a couple online. So I will pause briefly here and respond to those questions. Yeah, come on up.
Hi again, Nella Gonsalves. Just a quick question. Is there somewhere where we could find the list of the 2018 recipients?
Sure, that's on our website.
Awesome. Thank you.
If you have any trouble finding it there, feel free to call or email.
Great.
Yeah, you bet.
It is hard to find. Yeah, I tried to look for it. That's why
I'm sure our IT folks heard that comment.
Sergey Shkurkin from Youth for Families.
Good morning.
Good morning. Will there be a consideration for geographic distribution?
There is no specific consideration for that, so each proposal will be rated on its own merits, and the only categorization that's being used in this cycle is the request amount, so those small, medium, and large request categories. All right, so let's look at what we've got online there.
Okay, so number one is on page 20 of the RFP. In section 2, the second bullet states that services can be evidence-based or promising. Is an evidence-based program required, or can it be a promising practice?
It can be promising.
Okay. Can you elaborate on the level of confidentiality required for participants?
I don't believe I can. That is something that we will make a note of, and to the extent that we're able to provide some additional guidance around that, we will do so in our written FAQs that are developed after this event.
Do you have a recommendation in regards to the numbers served in relation to the grant size of grant funds requested? For example, for a request of $50,000 in grant funds, how many clients would you expect to see served?
That's really a matter that's going to be driven by local situation. So that's something that you'll need to address in the proposal narrative. And I don't have anything I can offer in terms of guidance around that.
Okay. Can unreimbursed volunteer time apply to the 25% match?
I think that we can look at that again, perhaps in our FAQs, but off the top of my head, volunteer by definition is not paid for, so that doesn't sound like a good fit.
And lastly, as of right now, can an NGO or CBO be the lead on one application and a subcontractor on another application?
That would be considered multiple, being a part of multiple applications, so no, that won't be allowed.
I have two more that just came in. Can local funding be applied as match funds for this grant? Like city or foundation funds that they already have as part of their funding.
I think, if I'm understanding that right, sounds like a yes.
Yes. If they were a subcontracted CBO in the 2018 round, can they apply as the lead for 2019?
No.
That's all we have so far.
Okay, great, thank you. Okay, so now, oh, yes, come on up.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted a clarification on the volunteer question. I think that's a great question. What if they're professional volunteers, such as social work interns or licensed therapist interns that are not getting paid or paid a lesser rate, like a stipend? Can partial hours be used potentially for match, in-kind match?
Yeah, that sounds like that would be appropriate, particularly in the case of a stipend.
You say that we cannot have multiple applications. Does that mean that they can't have multiple programs within the one application?
Your application could include multiple components. So again, the overall goal here is diversion, and so you need to lay out a diversion program. But remember, we also talked about those other components that are actually required, the mentoring or educational health, mental health or behavioral health. So so there's definitely an option here for multiple project components within your one application. That could also extend to things like serving multiple communities. You know, perhaps you're in an area where you would be working with more than one jurisdiction to provide services. That's certainly allowable as well.
Is it possible to scale up or scale down a proposal size and budget amount during contracting negotiations depending on available funds? And how would that occur?
No, we will be expecting the proposals to come in, laying out your plan as well as your budget. when the ESC members read and rate these proposals, it's based on the information that's been provided in your application. So if a proposal is selected for funding, what we're proposing to fund there is what you've put in your application.
That's it so far.
Okay, very good. Then let's look at, yes, one more question. That's okay.
I don't think I'm getting ahead of the game here, but there was kind of a conflict. On page 29, it reads that all NGOs that receive funds or as direct or sub-grantees must have tax-exempt status, and then goes ahead and defines those various kinds of, but then on page 48, it indicates the grantee may subcontract for services needed to implement and/or support program activities. Grantees agree that in an event of inconsistency between the grant agreement and grantee's agreement with the subcontractor, the language of this agreement will prevail. I understand that. What I don't understand is if in trying to deliver the educational services or the mental health services, those are going to be professional people that may be associated with a business, but not necessarily would be a nonprofit. You understand where I'm seeing the conflict?
I don't.
Okay. So if a grantee is trying to provide educational services or mentoring services or mental health services, do the individuals or organizations that they partner with for those services need to be nonprofits?
No.
Okay.
Let's take the other question in the room first, and then we'll go over here.
Curry with Sacramento Behavioral Health. It's a two-part question. Are we required to outline our subcontractors in the application, or can we identify subcontractors after the application if it's approved?
You can wait until later to identify them. So going forward, we'll cover that. So when you do your proposal, you're going to need to really lay out what you're planning to do and how you're going to do it to have a strong proposal. So I think sometimes that can be challenging if you don't have an idea of who you're going to be working with, but it's not required that you identify your partners up front. You can wait, and then if you're selected for funding, then identify them at that time.
My second part to that question is if there is someone that we would subcontract with one of our regular contracted providers in an existing program for expansion, if they were to apply for this same grant and were not funded, could they still be a subcontractor after the fact if we were funded?
Sure.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. All right, we've got something else online also?
Yeah. Can an NGO or CBO in a specialized service, i.e. mental or behavioral health, be a lead in this grant program and then be a partner or subcontractor with an existing diversion program?
Not an existing diversion program that's funded through this grant. Okay, great. So then let's go ahead and move back to the PowerPoint. And next we want to talk about the project evaluation requirements for this grant. So we do ask for you to do two different things related to evaluation as part of this grant. And the first is preparing a local evaluation plan. So if you're selected for funding, one of the first things that you'll be asked to do is to put together a plan that identifies your goals and objectives, as well as lays out a methodology for assessing the effectiveness of your project. So we do provide some time and some more specific guidance around that to those who are selected for funding, but There's also an appendix that we'll look at in a little bit that walks you through some of the questions to ask in regards to that. And then the other piece of it is the local evaluation report. So at the end of your grant process, we're going to be asking you to take a look at what you laid out in the plan, look at your goals, and then report to us about how successful your project was overall in terms of meeting the goals. Okay, so this next slide is an important one, and this has to do with disqualification. In the past, we have gone through a technical review process wherein we allowed an opportunity for corrections to be made. And we are not providing that same option this time. So we're really looking at being very clear up front on these pages 9 and 10 where we talk about disqualification and spelling out what I hope is a very clear way what the expectations are for applicants for this grant. So I want to encourage everyone to really spend some time looking at this information around disqualification and making sure that you're familiar with it. Okay, so these next couple of slides just walk us through some of the other requirements that come into play for all of our grantees. The first one here is the grant agreement. So this will be the contractual agreement that we enter into with everyone that's selected for funding through this grant. We'll also be looking for a governing board resolution to be submitted by everyone. This is something that can be submitted up front with your application, but generally we see applicants wait until they're selected for funding to submit that. We have audit requirements tied to this grant, and that does allow us to come in and audit your records at any time. It also allows us up to 3 years after conclusion of the grant. The grantee orientation is something that we offer. Actually, we don't offer it, we require it of every grantee. So if you're selected for funding, you'll be notified about the grantee orientation, and that is our opportunity to provide specific information about the grant and about what our expectations are during the implementation phase of the grant. Funding disbursement for this grant does allow for advance payment. So we will be providing a 1/3 payment up front to all grantees, and then providing the following 1/3 when 80% of funds have been spent, and the final 1/3 when 80% of the total funds have been spent. There's a requirement for quarterly progress reporting with this grant, and there's a sample provided in your RFP packet of what that might look like. Few other requirements. It is possible for you to fund travel costs tied to implementation of your grant. However, there are some specific requirements and rules around that, so we ask you all to take a look at that. Similarly, there's some prohibitions around debarment, fraud, theft, and embezzlement, and we would ask that all of you take a close look at that as well. Our comprehensive monitoring visits are something that we conduct for all grantees once implementation is underway and services are being provided. So it's important that you take a look at that up front and understand what will be required of grantees once you're actually under contract and implementing the program. Effective programs and data-driven approaches are, of course, encouraged. We had the question a minute ago. We're not going to be checking that your that your program models are on any particular EBP list, but of course, we always like to see the efficient use of state funds, so we do encourage the use of effective programs and data-driven approaches. Reducing racial and ethnic disparities is something that we also want to encourage that you look at and consider in terms of how you're putting together your proposal and what impact there may be in terms of your project implementation. Okay, so now we're going to talk a little bit about the proposal rating process. So this moves us from looking at the application process to the next phase, which is the rating process. So the first thing that's going to happen is applications will be submitted. And again, just a quick reminder here that we are only accepting electronic submissions this year. When you make that electronic submission, you will receive a system-generated auto notification that we've received your application. So I just want to highlight that for folks so you don't feel like if you don't receive a personal note from one of us that perhaps we didn't receive your application. That system-generated response should assure you that it has been received, and you will hear from us shortly. Okay, again, the disqualifications, I really, really want to urge everyone to make sure you look through that, understand that, and know what's being asked of you as an applicant. Okay, and then finally here we have the ESC rating process. So again, as I talked about a little bit earlier, our ESC members move from a role of developing the grant criteria into reading and rating the RFP applications that are received through that process. All right, so what that rating process will look like. We have, for this grant, the ESC established 5 rating factors. They are project need, project description, organizational capacity and coordination, data collection and evaluation, and then your project budget. So this slide has a lot of really good information on it for you. You know the different things that we're going to be looking for you to explain to us and describe to us in your proposal narrative. And also, I want to encourage you to take a look at the percent of total value column on this table. So as you look at your proposal narrative and the 10-page limit that's applied to that narrative, these percentages here can give you an idea of how you might want to focus your time and pages in terms of addressing those individual rating factors. Also, I just want to note that each factor has specific criteria that's tied to it, and that is all specifically laid out in the RFP pages 19 through 23. So this particular table can be found at page 11, and then the specific criteria comes a little bit later. And then also we see with these rating factors, for each of the factors, they'll be receiving a point value from 1 to 5. And it's imperative that the factors be addressed in a way that is responsive to the criteria that's laid out later in the RFP in order to receive the higher point values. So when we look at those points, here on this next slide, we see the scoring rubric, or the 1 through 5 scoring scale that we use. And so one of the notes on that last slide was that we have adopted a 60% scoring threshold for this process. So that means of all the points that are available, which is a total of 300, any applicant to receive funding would need to receive at least 180 points. So then when we look at this rating scale, that means you're going to need to be receiving, on average, a rating of 3 or satisfactory. With this process, the ESC did not establish any preference points. So the 300 points that are available through the 5 rating factors are the maximum that's available overall. Okay, and then here we have a just an overview of the proposal components. So this goes to the information that's provided in the RFP on pages 18 through 24. So the first part of your proposal will be an abstract, and that is limited to 1 page. The next piece will be your proposal narrative, and that's limited to 10 pages overall, within which you are asked to address your project narrative, your project description, the organizational capacity and coordination, and also your data collection and evaluation. So your project budget is outside of that. And again, that's a separate Excel document that Isabel's going to walk you through in just a minute here. And then also your project work plan is a separate document. So that's the very last page of your RFP, but it will need to be presented as part of your complete proposal package. There are optional additional documents that can be included, but those additional documents in this case are limited to letters of commitment. So you're not required to submit letters of commitment, but if you want to, you may, and those are considered as additional documents that would be included as part of the rating process or the review process. Okay, and so now we will look in depth at the budget attachment. Yes.
Someone was asking, with the understanding that if they received funds either directly or indirectly from the first round, and not being eligible for this round, do we have an idea of when they're going to be able to apply in future rounds of funding?
At this point, we don't know that there will be future rounds, so I don't have an answer right now. That's it? Okay. Anything else in the room? Okay, let's go ahead and look at the budget then.
Okay, as Kim mentioned, I'll be covering the budget attachment. I'll go over where you can locate the Excel document. I'll explain how to fill it out, and then I'll also cover a few budget examples. Okay, to find your Excel document, you'd go to the Youth Reinvestment Grant website. The link is here on this slide. You'd select the 2019 Youth Reinvestment Grant Program Request for Proposal accordion. Once you drop down the accordion, within the body, you'll find the link to the RFP. Once you have the RFP open, you can go to either page 24 or 84, where you'll see the link that says, to access the YRG budget attachment, click here. Once you click the link, you'll be taken to a separate document, which is an Excel document. You'll have 2 tabs. The first tab will be the budget attachment instructions, and the second tab will be your budget table and budget narrative. So before we go into taking a look on how to actually complete the budget attachment, does anyone have any questions on how to access the Excel document? Okay, no questions. So when we go to the budget table tab, the first thing we'll see is this budget line item table that's shaded in blue. These are the nine line items that the applicants, both the local and the nonprofit, are limited to. The blue shaded areas are all auto-populated and they're locked. Similar to any other blue shaded areas in the budget attachment, they'll also be locked and auto-populated. The information is going to be auto-populated from the budget table and narrative for each individual line item, which we'll go over in the next slide. So up on the screen, I have data collection. This is an example of the budget table and budget narrative that each line item will have. Your expenditures will go in the budget table areas and then followed by a description in the budget narrative. Okay, a few requirements that I'd like to go over for the budget attachment. At the very top, either you'll enter your department name. So for example, if you're a local government agency and you're the probation department, you'd identify the probation department. If you're a nonprofit, you would identify your organization's name. The application should be for the entire 3 years, and it should be the budget for the applicant. So again, if you're the probation department, this will reflect the probation department's budget, not the 90% budget pass-through, which we'll go over that in detail in a few slides. All funding should be requested in whole dollars, and if you are not requesting funding out of a particular line item, go ahead and identify that by leaving the $0 request and entering an NA in the narrative section. So the first example I have on the screen is salaries and benefits. In this budget line item, you'd identify the staff that will be funded through the program. I would say the major differences for the local government agency, again, sticking to my probation department example, you'd only identify the staff that are from the probation department. And that 90% pass-through will be identified on a different budget line item. For the nonprofit, you would identify all the staff within your organization. So here's the NGO budget line item. In this section, you would identify any subcontractors you may have. As mentioned earlier, you don't have to have the NGO or the subcontractor identified when you submit your application, but we do ask that you identify the amount that will be allocated and the services they will be providing. One of the major differences is the local government agency, a major portion of their budget will be in this section, 90% of it will be displayed here, versus for the nonprofit, most of their budget will be displayed through line items 1 and 9, not necessarily 90% on this line item. Equipment and fixed assets. Equipment and fixed assets are non-expendable property having a useful life of more than 1 year and acquisition cost of $5,000 or more per unit. So again, this section should identify any expenses that the applicant will incur. But I would like to note that even though if you have something like, for example, a vehicle in your proposal and also stated in your budget attachment, you will still need to get prior approval before actually going out and purchasing this item. The other line item would identify any travel or training that the applicant will incur. And out-of-state travel is restricted and only allowed in exceptional situations. Again, similar to the vehicle that I had just mentioned, before going on travel out of state, you would have to request prior approval, even if it's mentioned in your proposal or identified in the budget attachment. Indirect costs. So both applicants have two options. The first option will be 10% of direct salaries and wages, including or excluding benefits, or 5% of total direct project costs, excluding equipment. And we just asked in the narrative, you identify how the expenses will be supported by the indirect costs. Do we have any questions?
Yeah, come on up.
Hi. Sergey Shkurkin from Pro Family, Pro Youth and Families. In another part of the RFP, you are encouraging outside evaluations. And so keeping that in mind, if we had we were a nonprofit organization and we would be hiring an outside evaluation firm that is not a nonprofit organization, that is a vendor, would they go under professional services or would they be under data collection?
So the nonprofit is the applicant?
They're the applicant, and they're hiring a third party, or like a evaluation consulting outfit, to do the eval, an experienced one. So it is data collection. They're going to be involved in data collection.
Yes, it would go under data collection.
Not professional services.
It could be both. I hear the point you're making, but we prefer to have it under data collection. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks. come on in.
Just a further question on evaluators
Okay.
and who you're contracting with. While we cannot travel out of state, could an out-of-state university be assigned to do the evaluation, or must that evaluator be within the state of California?
If you're wanting to use the grant funds to pay for their costs, then there would still be restrictions on that.
Okay, so even though we don't travel, we need to use somebody in-state for the evaluation.
Well, the restriction is on travel in particular. So I'm not saying that you couldn't use somebody out of state, because you still may be able to pay for their costs, but just not the travel.
Okay. Because in the field that we work, in criminal justice, for youth courts, there aren't many evaluators in the country. And there are some that are better than others. If we can contract, for example, with University of Nevada, Reno, who has a school of criminal justice, and is very experienced in evaluating criminal justice programs, we might choose to use them as the evaluator rather than search around in California for somebody that may or may not be familiar with how to collect and evaluate that kind of data.
Okay, well, let me look into that a little bit
Okay.
more, and in the written version of our FAQs, we'll provide a complete response with more detail about what would and would not be allowable under
Okay,
that kind of
thank
scenario.
you.
Thank you. Any other questions on the budget? Okay, let's go ahead and go through this, and then we'll get to just open it up for general. Get a budget? Come on up.
I'm Michael from Mental Health America of San Diego County.
Hi.
I have a question with the indirect cost.
Okay.
Do we have a ceiling amount?
Yes.
For how much that would be? Because it doesn't state here. How much would it be? The ceiling
Oh,
amount.
well, it's a percentage, so
Okay.
the amount's going to vary depending on how much you're requesting.
Uh-huh.
So it's, do you want
It
to?
says here, not to exceed.
Correct.
Uh-huh.
When you fill out your budget, that area would also auto-populate, and that's the amount you wouldn't exceed.
Okay, so it will let us know how much would be the maximum we can use?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Whoop. So there's contact information on the budget information specifically, should you need it. And just a few quick reminders or key takeaways here on the budget. So again, I know I've said this a handful of times already, but the budget table and the budget narrative are separate documents. We do need that in Excel. And what you present there in the table and in the narrative for your budget should, of course, tie to what's in your proposal narrative. Also, I want to note that the total amount that you have in your budget is the total amount that you're requesting overall for the full 3 years. So this isn't an annual budget. When you fill out that Excel budget table, it's your total budget for the whole grant term. I also want to make one other note because I forgot to do it earlier when I meant to. Isabel just spent some time talking about the difference between government applicants and NGO applicants and the 90% pass-through requirement for our government applicants. So I just want to make a note here that we do consider that 90% to be a minimum amount that can be passed through. So if there's a government applicant out there that is looking at passing through more than 90% to their community partners, We wouldn't necessarily preclude that, but we strongly encourage you to check in with your local control agency before committing to that, just to make sure that you're in line with all of the local policies and procedures that are in place. Okay. And then, again, just in terms of where to find the Excel budget document, it is built directly into the RFP. So make sure that you're looking at that document to find the budget attachment. And then one final request from us is that when you get into that Excel document, please don't change our formulas or delete them or move things around. It really makes it very challenging for us once we receive them to be able to do the work that we do in terms of getting the proposals ready for our raters to receive that information. So we appreciate your understanding on that. Okay. Yes.
Question on the form, Carol Ross, Pro Families. If we need more lines, can we add lines? Because I think we're going to have a lot of NGO partners.
Thank you for asking that. I actually meant to mention this. Please don't add any lines, but go ahead and type in. I don't think there's a limit to how many words you can have in a cell, but once you submit it on our end, we'll expand the cells, so your raters will be able to read everything that you submitted on there.
But for line items, if we have more partners, then do we just maybe say 6 partners, see narrative below?
I
kind
was
of
just
thing?
about to recommend that. I would probably put 6 partners, and then in the narrative, identify the 6 partners. And again, feel free to type as much as you need, and if you can't see it when you click out of the cell, that's okay. I'll expand the cells.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So we're getting close to the end here, but the last part of the RFP does include a number of appendices, and I want to walk through that at least quickly here so that you know all the materials that you have available to you. So Appendix A is the glossary that I referenced earlier. I do encourage everybody to take a look at that, since it does provide some definitions that are specific to this grant. And then the second appendix, Appendix B, is our NGO criteria. And so that spells out all of the criteria that we walked through earlier and provides a place for you to identify your NGO partners once you've identified them, and to sign off on that. And then Appendix C is the certification that we ask for from every applicant related to debarment, theft, fraud, and embezzlement. Appendix D provides a sample format for your resolution. It's not imperative that you use our form. That's just a sample. As long as you have all the information that we're asking for, you are welcome to provide your own format for that. Appendix E provides some additional information about the local evaluation plan that we talked about earlier. And then Appendix F is a proposal formatting tool. So again, we talked about the disqualification factors, and some of those look at the format of what you're submitting to us. And this is the tool that we will use when we receive your applications to ensure that you're in compliance with the font, the line spacing, the margins, all of that. So we're providing this tool to you up front so that you can check that yourselves and make sure that you're providing what we're asking for. Appendix G is the Executive Steering Committee roster. And then Appendix H gives you a sample of the standard agreement. So a couple things I want to note here. One, it is just a sample, so this isn't going to be exactly the same as what we would be asking you to sign, but it will give you a good idea of what the contract would look like that we would be putting together with all those who are selected for funding. Appendix I provides a sample quarterly progress report. And again, this is a sample. This is pretty much guaranteed to look different when it's finalized. But again, it gives you an idea of the types of things and the types of formatting that we'll be looking at for the quarterly progress reports. Appendix J provides a sample monitoring tool. So we talked just a minute ago about the comprehensive monitoring visits that are conducted by BSCC staff once the grant is being implemented. And so this is a sample of what we might be looking at and asking you to respond to during that kind of monitoring visit. And then finally, Appendix K provides some evidence-based resources for you to use in developing your proposal. All right, so then the proposal instructions. So this gets us to the very last part of the RFP, so pages 79 through the end of the document. The proposal checklist, I've highlighted that here because I feel like that is a critical document in terms of your successfully getting all of the pieces of your proposal pulled together. And so I really encourage everyone to rely heavily on that document to be your guide for all the information that's needed for your proposal package, and in terms of knowing which ones need signatures and what page limitations are in place and all of that. It's all laid out in a nice one-page format there in the checklist. We also have the applicant information form that's part of this proposal package, and that's an important document. I really want to encourage you to make sure that you walk through that carefully and get it completed accurately and thoroughly. There's a lot of information there, and it is essential that you complete all the information. Your proposal narrative will lay out the essential piece of your application. So that's where you're going to spell out what you plan to do with these grant funds. And then, of course, your budget table and narrative will support that proposal narrative. And then finally, again, I've added on this slide the disqualification instructions. So I encourage you one last time to make sure you look at that information and be familiar with it as you put your proposals together. All right, and then just a quick look here at the key dates. So again, we are asking for letters of intent to apply by December 20th. And then the actual proposals will be due next year on February 14th. And then once we receive those proposals, we do the quick review to make sure that things have come in the way we expected, and of course to identify any disqualified applications. But everything else will be forwarded to our executive steering committee for the reading and rating. And that process takes from March through May for them to be trained on how to read and rate proposals and apply the rating factors, and then of course to go away and on their own do that reading and rating, and then to come back together and actually develop a funding recommendation. We are anticipating at this point to be able to present to our board the funding recommendations by their June 11th meeting. And then with that, we would be able to begin the new grants as of July 1st of next year. Assuming we hit all those dates, we would be looking at conducting our new grantee orientation somewhere around September or October of next year. And with that, I will take any questions from anyone for the all of what we went through this morning. And let's go ahead and start with the questions that we have in the room. So I'll ask you to come on up if you'd like.
Hi again, Carol Rossett. So two things. It says signed in blue ink, original signature, but of course, because we're submitting PDFs, they're going to be PDF signatures.
Yes.
Okay, I knew that, but just that's such a critical issue.
Yep.
Wanted to confirm that.
Oh,
And
I'm sorry, just a point of clarification. So the document will be signed, the hard copy will be signed, and then you'll scan that. So as opposed to like a PDF, like ClickBox or something that certifies,
Okay,
yeah.
you
We're-
need a scan of a wet signature.
We need a scan of a wet signature. That's exactly right. Thank you for,
Okay.
yeah.
Another question I saw in the FAQs that was talking about service providers are expected to accept calls from anyone who would otherwise call law enforcement. And I was wondering if you could expand on that a little bit. Do you anticipate that recipients of the award will do marketing or community outreach to people other than who would be direct participants of the program, say to the families and to the broader community neighbors, that this is a diversion resource? Because that would be another whole kind of outreach.
I think the intent with the ESC was just that it be a service that's open. So the idea there is to be accepting referrals, pretty broadly. And again, the idea here, we want to try and capture folks as early as possible. So does that help at all? I don't know.
So it sounds like you're really not looking for a broader community outreach, that this is a resource that you can refer someone.
There's no mandate that you
Okay.
include outreach as part of your proposal.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's
Just-
more accept calls if they come, but not seek to attract them.
That's right.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, come on up.
I was wondering if you would define the high arrest rates, and if the high arrest rate, or if the high arrest also, say for example, if law enforcement contact occurred, but it did not result in a citation, would that count as a high arrest rate?
That's actually something where within your proposal, each applicant has the opportunity to use the data available and paint the picture. So, of course, you want to demonstrate that there's a need in your area. So, however, what the data that you have available to you, you can present that in the way that works for you locally.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome. Anybody else in the room have a question? Okay, let's go ahead and turn to the online questions.
Okay, number one, the RFP references that website links are not to be included in the proposal narrative. Can footnotes to support quantitative data be included?
They can be, they just are part of the 10-page limit.
This CBO wants to know that they work with several agencies, San Bernardino, Riverside, LA County. They wanted to confirm whether or not they can submit a regional network proposal versus just an individual proposal.
For each applicant, there's an opportunity to partner with whatever agencies you feel are needed in order for your for your project to be successful. But there wouldn't be any, there is no regional proposal this time, so there's no formal identification of partners that would be needed or requested.
All right, we're scrolling back and forth. What is allowed for the indirect cost piece? The state website does not have updated guidance.
Do you want to read that off again, Isabel? The 5%, yeah. So currently, our BSCC grant administration guide provides for two options related to indirect costs, and Isabel will read those now.
Option 1 is 10% of direct salaries and wages, including or excluding benefits. Or option 2, 5% of total direct project costs, excluding equipment.
They want to know why we've chosen those amounts. Is why are they so low? Their indirect personally is usually 15%.
We certainly understand that other agencies use different rates, and frankly, I can't speak to where those came from, but that is what we have at this time. That's what's in our published grant administration guide, and so those are the only two options available as of now.
Is there any cap on the portion of the grant funds that are awarded to be used for salaries and benefits?
No, there is not.
Pamela, your answer is yes. The conference will be available to review. What is the required content within the letter of intent?
I'll have to look at the RFP. I don't remember specifically if we laid that out. Yeah, sorry to have to do that. I have another grant that we did this for yesterday, and there's different criteria. But for this one, it just says that there is no specific format for these letters, but each must be on the committing partner's organization letterhead.
Can parameters for community be other than zip code or neighborhood named in the RFP? For instance, can jurisdictions be used to define a target area or city planning zone?
Yes.
When it comes to employees, do we pay them based on our current rate, or is there a specific rate you require and we cover the rest of their salaries?
We don't require any specific salary rate.
When identifying staff positions, is their name required or just the category and or position sufficient for a nonprofit?
Either is acceptable.
Okay. For clarification, the evaluation plan is written after funding has been awarded, correct?
Yes.
Can you request an exemption for a 10% match, but include in proposal if denied, you can do a 25% match, but for a lesser grant amount?
Your grant application will be read and rated by the ESC members as it is submitted. So once that rating process is complete, the funding recommendation will be made, and there would not be an opportunity to amend proposals after that point. Or just to clarify, at any time after the proposal due date.
Is the 1 to 2 pages a hard limit for the work plan?
Yes.
We already answered that one. For including of the arrest rate, can it be law enforcement contact of booking or issuing a citation in lieu of arrest?
So as with the question a minute ago, it's really up to each applicant to figure out what data is available to you to support the request that you're making. And so that's really a matter of local availability and discretion.
And then lastly, as of right now, do you have any recommendations for de-aggregated juvenile arrest data sources at levels of zip codes or neighborhoods? Most DOJ report resources are aggregated by larger geographical units.
the question was asking for less aggregated data for like statewide or not statewide, citywide.
So for like specific zip codes and neighborhoods, usually the DOJ reports don't get that specific. It's for a much broader geographical area. So do you have recommendations on where those data sources can be received from?
The only data sources that I've worked with personally are Open Justice, and I believe they are just citywide. I don't think they go down to the zip code level. But I can ask my supervisor and see if she's got any ideas for where we could find a little bit more nuanced data. But I'm not sure if we're going to have a breakdown that small. So it might just have to be citywide, unfortunately.
So we'll make a note of that, and if we have anything, any better information we can provide, we'll do that in our written FAQs.
And that concludes the online questions as of right now.
Okay, great. So just a few quick final things here to wrap us up. Again, the proposals are due February 14th of next year. That's 5 p.m. And you know, our computers don't always work quite the way we expect them to. I know last year I had somebody who thought she hit send and went to grab a cup of coffee and came back an hour later, and they weren't able to be included in the process. So, you know, plan to do it earlier than 4:59, and make sure you get in. Also, for any questions that you think of after you leave here today, please feel free to submit those to our grant mailbox. That address is listed here on the slide and throughout the RFP. We will be responding to questions through the proposal due date, and we'll update our posted FAQs on the website as needed to reflect additional questions coming in. One last time, I'm going to say, use the checklist and the disqualification instructions included in the RFP to help guide you to a successful outcome. And that is all we have. So thank you all for being here today.